This evening we're going to be looking at one authority. There is just one authority when it comes to all of mankind, when it comes to religion, when it comes to right and wrong. There is just one authority involved. One. Christ says it's Him. And at the end of Matthew chapter 28, at the end of the book of Matthew, in 18, verse 18, Jesus says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. He has all authority. Well, that is really a fulfillment of prophecy because the prophet spoke about that. You have places such as Psalm 2, where in that psalm is a prophecy of Jehovah giving a rod of iron to His Christ to rule the nations. That He calls Him His king on His holy mountain. He also says that He will rule the nations with a rod of iron. Well, you would have to have authority to be able to do that. You'd have to. There's also Psalm 110. The Lord said, or Jehovah said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Well, if you are at the right hand of God and all your enemies become your footstool, that means you have some authority. Matter of fact, He says He has all authority, and who are we to doubt that? Who could doubt that? There is just one authority over mankind. Now, let's just discuss why that is a good thing, because it is a good thing. What God gives us, there's no confusion. There is also nothing hazy about it. It is everything that God gives us actually is, we call it streamlined or extremely efficient. It's the most streamlined plan you could have. It is us, and above us is Christ, and then the Godhead, the Father. Now, that's it. And the beauty in all this is the simplicity and also the certainty of it. Because if there was someone else in between us and God, let's say another man, some other person, well, do we have confidence? You'd have to have faith in that person. You'd have to have faith in them, as you've got to have faith in Christ. You've got to have faith in that person, that person is going to get it right. And also that person's not going to be corrupted. Christ can never be corrupted, but some man can be. But with Christ having all authority, you have all confusion. There is none. And of course, God is not the author of confusion. The uncertainty, there is none. Now, I may have told this story before. I don't remember if I've told it here or not. But it was years ago. I had an office, and behind me was a window, and outside the window was the view of an intersection. And I hear a boom. So I know that something happened. I look out, and yeah, there is a wreck that just occurred. So this was really before the age of cell phones being so prevalent. So because I had a telephone right there, I called 911. And they immediately I tell them where the accident occurred. Did anybody get hurt? I said, I don't know, I'm just calling. And they want to know, is it on the south side of the road or the north side of the road? And I said, well, it's the south side. They said, okay, you've got the wrong number. You need to be calling. I'm going to switch you over because you've got the wrong town. Okay, I'm going to switch you over. So I got switched over to another 911, and I tell them the same thing. Is anybody hurt? I say, not that I'm aware of. I don't know, but I'm calling. And they said, okay, is it on the street or on the sidewalk? And I said, well, it's on the street. And they said, no, that doesn't go to us. That goes to the other place that just transferred you over here, and they transferred me back. And when the operator got me back again, she was irritated. And she said, okay, I'll send somebody. And they can figure it out. Well, yeah, that's why all the rigmarole? Because it just so happens that that particular intersection was a boundary between one city and another city. One set of police and another set of police. All right? And so they needed to know exactly where, as though I'm going to be able to get out there with the surveyor's tool and tell them exactly where it is. I can't. All right, somebody just get here, someone may be hurt. Now with Christ, there is no question of jurisdiction because there's just one authority. All authority in heaven and on earth. Well, what's beyond that? There is nothing beyond that. That's it. That's all there is. There's this created realm, and then heaven would be everything beyond this created realm. Everything beyond. And so there is just one authority over all of that. Just one authority, and so there is no confusion. And that is the beauty behind it. The idea that someone can come in and also be an authority is alien to the Bible. That means it didn't come from the biblical text. Bible never hints ever that someone else will be in between you and God, or anyone's going to come in between you and Christ. There is no hint in that. And for those who want to bring up Matthew chapter 16, well, we can talk about Matthew chapter 16. And Matthew chapter 16 is taken completely away from what its meaning actually is. When Jesus says these words, verse 18, and I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Now Christ is not singling out Peter as far as having the keys to the kingdom of heaven. He's not singling out him. He's bringing him by way of name because it was Peter's confession. That's the rock. All right, the rock is not Peter. The rock is the confession that Peter just made that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is the rock. And then he says, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now let's just go to chapter 18:18. Now, he isn't singling out Peter at all. Peter's not even mentioned in this, but we do see at the beginning of chapter 18, and at that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Then Jesus called the little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, okay, so here he is speaking to disciples. And he says in verse 18, assuredly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Or what is he saying in this? That actually, as we have shown before, the verbs in this are wrong. That whatever is bound on earth will have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. Meaning there is a guidance that's going to be to the writers of the New Testament and those who happen to be prophesying. It's not that anybody can make up whatever they want, because you can't. It's Christ who provides the authority, so it does not rest on any man. It doesn't rest whatsoever. And that would be a catastrophe if God allowed for that. It would be a catastrophe. There is a reason why there have been extremely corrupt popes. Those that are just after the power, after the prestige, after the wealth, after the power. That's what they want. You have something that people want. A place of power that people will want. You'll have those who are less than good, who've got their eyes on it. Less than good. And you have, through the ages, cult leaders, televangelists, all sorts that have pretended to be an authority, and they have no authority whatsoever, because all of it has been given to Christ. Now, question we have to ask is, okay, so he has all authority. What has he given? Has he given us any law whatsoever? Has he used that authority in any way at all? Well, just going back to Matthew chapter 28, yeah, he did. He immediately delegated some things. Immediately. To go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations. He tells them to do this. To do that very thing, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. So there is immediately, is that law? Yeah, it's law. That's not the only part of law. Matter of fact, the book of James, and James is not the only place mentioning this, but James mentions this several times you've got the perfect law of liberty. Chapter 1 and 25. You have the royal law, chapter 2 and verse 8. You have the whole law, chapter 2 and 10. You have the law of liberty, chapter 2 and 12. And there is one lawgiver. That's chapter 4 and verse 12. If there's only one lawgiver, that means no one else can make the law. Not only are we under law, but with the lawgiver, obviously, there has to be a law that the lawgiver has given, and nobody else can do it. Nobody else is allowed to do it. Romans chapter 8 and verse 2, you have the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. This is showing we are under law. We are. And it comes from one lawgiver. That's all we have, which, once again, that is a good thing. Now, let's go to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, and we just begin in verse 1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling. All right, so there's one body, that's one body of believers, nothing else. All right? There is one calling that has been given out. Verse 5, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. That's it. Nothing beyond that. Verse 6, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. Here are this series of ones that is here. And Christ is that one Lord, bringing that, He is the lawgiver, He's the one bringing that one faith. Now, with that one lawgiver and that one faith, there is going to be, and there is, consistency and a law that is universal through space and through time. Space meaning whatever country you are from, you're under that law. The same way that those in Israel or Jerusalem were saved on the day of Pentecost is the same way that those in Ephesus were saved a few years later, a couple of decades or so later. Those in Ephesus, it's the same for them. Those in Corinth, it's the same for them. Those in Thyatira or Philippi, it's the same for them. Now, coming out of the first century and all the way to our day, it's the same way today. There is simplicity, there is clarity. What else do you want? How complicated do you want it to be? And Christ, with that one authority, has His eye on all humanity and all time. Let's just take a moment and talk about this. The law of Moses given on Mount Sinai was, as we know, its fulfillment was to the cross. It was to bring in the Messiah, and the Messiah dying for the sins of the world. There is where that law, along with the law of patriarchy that predates law of Moses, those two laws are nailed to the cross. They are no more. That law of Moses was good all the way through that time, and then came to its fulfillment. That's precisely what it was. Now we can look at the law of Moses and we can see where all the way from Sinai to, let's just take the book of Nehemiah, that they were all bound to that law through all that time. They're bound to it. And they are, and it wasn't too long ago we had a lesson concerning this very idea that you have someone who decides to do something, but they're not doing it God's way. And God's way, as He told it centuries earlier, written down by Moses, told and recorded centuries earlier, they did it a different way, and it was sin. And the anger of the Lord was set upon them. All right, the same thing holds today. Why wouldn't it? You have the example of God. That with the law of Christ, we have the same thing to this day, and with one authority over us. Now, let's talk about the idea of in the religious world, because we can see it really throughout time, that outside of God and His ways, leave that, and you also leave the idea of authority. You do. You leave that idea. And you can see it time and time again. You can see it in the ancient world, and you can see it today in action. And what do I mean? All right. In the ancient world, in the Middle East, there was the worship of Baal, especially in the coastal area of around Canaan and in that general area. There's the worship of Baal. But as we can see from the Old Testament, the Baal of this village was different from the Baal of that village, which was different. Both of those were different from the Baal of another village. Every single one of them would have images of Baal, but Baal always changed. Well, why would that be? Because it's just what the local people want to, their lore, their idea of what Baal is, what he's over, what he does, how he's worshipped is completely different. And if you've read the things like the Greek myths, or with the Egyptians, or with any others, you will see that there's a lot of things that are weird about it. A lot of things that are just really strange, and it's because things have been added through time. That's what has occurred. Things have been added through time, and that you have where you can have a particular story, a particular legend, where in this city the legend went this direction, and this city the legend went a completely different direction. All right, because there's no authority there. There's none. There was nothing to guide anyone in the worship of Baal. It's not there. And we can see the same thing happening today, where most of world religion, is, and I don't mean concerning followers of Christ, but plenty who believe they are following Christ, that they are following no real authority at all. It's just a matter of what the local attitude happens to be. What the local people want, what they're going to do, that's the way it is. That's why, like with Roman Catholicism here in the States, is very different than what it is in Italy, and very different than what it is in Brazil. Very different. And you have this blending of local ideas. and local religions and local traditions, and they all get into this mishmash. That's the way man works. But that's not the way God works. Not at all. I know, not that I've done it, but I know that if we could go back in time and visit Ephesus, or visit the church in Jerusalem, or visit the church in Sardis, if we were able to go into the first century and go there, while we wouldn't be able to speak the language, quite sure of that, I guess if we go back in time, we might as well give us the ability to speak their language, that it's going to be familiar ground. Completely familiar ground. They would have the same doctrine that we should have today, and it's all following the New Testament. It's all following the writing and the authority of Christ, because there is nothing to be added. There's nothing to be taken away or edited. Nothing needs to be corrected. Nothing needs to be modified. Nothing needs to be updated. It's perfect. And regardless of when you're born, it's perfect. And it will save today like it did in the first century. And it will create the church today like it did in the first century. And we just need to grow in the words. We must do that. Coming up soon, I want to have a sermon concerning what we can know about Christ from the Sermon on the Mount. Somebody there in the days when Christ were upon this earth, of hearing the Sermon on the Mount, and I mean this could be toward the very beginning of his ministry. Hearing the Sermon on the Mount, what you could know in leaving that sermon. Because he's not speaking on just one subject, he's speaking on a number of subjects, but there is something that is an overriding implication and a little bit more than an implication. That is, and he's speaking like no prophet ever did. Not only is he speaking with authority like the rabbis never did, he's speaking in ways that the prophets never did. But we have these words, Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who builds his house on a rock. All right, that is because it's his authority. His authority. And his words are worthy of your life as the foundation of your life. But at verse 26, but everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. Showing that his commands are more than just idle talk, more than just theory, more than just some kind of interesting subject to talk about. This is your life, and you can count on his words. In John 14 and verse 15, he said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Not somebody else's commandments. And you may need to keep somebody else's commandments, but no one supersedes Christ. No one has a greater authority than him. And later in that chapter in verse 24, he who does not love me does not keep my words. So here we can know if we love Christ or not love Christ. You can think that you do, and I've met a lot of people that think they do. They just think they know they do. Are they keeping his words? No, they're not doing that. So it's not what they think. What does God think? What's his take on it? What is it that he thinks about it? Because there's only one person who's going to judge whether they did or not, and it's the one that says you've got to keep all his commandments to love him. You're going to have to be doing it. That doesn't make you a legalist. That makes you righteous. That doesn't make you a legalist at all. That makes you someone who's concerned with following God. And we can look through the text of the Bible, going all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, and see where God was interested in details. Because He's the one that gives the authority of how He is to be worshiped. We also have in the book of Galatians, Galatians chapter 6 in verse 2, and so fulfill the law of Christ. James is not the only one that speaks of law. Christ also speaks of law. The Apostle Paul also speaks of law and of that one authority. Christ said He had it. David prophesied about it. Paul and James and others saying, yep, it belongs to him and nobody else. This is to show what the church is founded on and what our lives must be founded on. It must be. And that it's not going to change. The law of Christ doesn't change from generation to generation or from year to year. It is constant, which once again brings simplicity, consistency, and certainty. You know, every time my phone gets an update or a computer gets an update, I wonder, am I going to regret that this is happening? Every single time. What are they pulling on me next that I'm going to have to relearn? Why can't we just keep it the same? Are you changing it just to change it? Right? Christ doesn't change it. Doesn't need to be changed. Doesn't need to be updated. Christ doesn't change it, so you can trust that the examples that are approved in the New Testament are approved today. The examples that are disapproved and condemned in the New Testament are still condemned today. Follow one, learn from both. As Paul stated, imitate me as I also imitate Christ. All right, don't imitate Paul the way he might be at certain times. And yes, he was quite the vicious failure at the beginning part of his life. But he turned to God wholeheartedly, and which is exactly what we are to do. Once he learned the truth, he followed the truth. That's what we need. We ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, if we can help you in any way, that you come as we stand and sing.